Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX, and we just got finished up testing the 2023 Husqvarna FC350. So I've had a bit of experience with this new generation Austrian bike, having done the Factory Edition and the Rockstar Edition launches. However, I missed the KTM launch, so this is my first experience riding the new generation 350. I've tried the 250, 450 a lot, so a lot of experience with this chassis update in this generation motorcycle, but it was cool to finally get on the 350 and see how these updates pertain to this specific model. So talking about those updates, a few things that we'll put out there. If you want to check out the first look, all the technical information, hit the link below, but I'll run you through a few quick items. So of course, this is an all new generation platform. Big thing with this is they really redid the frame and all the engines in this class for the 4-stroke, so they all fit in one chassis now. So this engine is heavily updated from the outgoing 350, but compared to maybe the 450 and the 250, it's the least of the three on performance level. It does have a new cylinder head, some changes in the valve train, piston, a few things, but not as big as where the 250 got a 3mm bore change. So a little bit of the cylinder head, big focus on the exhaust system on this bike, mapping, airbox, and a few things of those natures to try to get a little more mid-range out of it. They're still just trying to close that gap up a little bit between a 350 and a 450 to maybe end the question mark for the guys that are curious in getting this bike. Something that makes this model specifically interesting is, again, Husqvarna has gone for lowered suspension. The Rockstar Edition bikes we rode just a couple months ago were standard length suspension, the same as the KTMs, but now that we're into the production Huskies, similar to their 2022 models, they've chosen to go 10mm lower. So they've been able to shorten the actual length of the fork by 10mm. That's pretty simple to do internally. And then the shock is a combination of a different link and bell crank to get it 10mm lower, the way it sets, and then just to keep the tire from basically hitting the fender. There's kind of a block-out bumper in the shock body itself to kind of limit the end of the travel. So you end up with a bike that sits 10mm lower on ride height. Big theory behind this is you get a lower center of gravity, should make the bike easier to corner. However, last year, I was honestly not a huge fan of this, and pretty much anybody on our staff wasn't. We do know some media outlets were stoked on it. Yes, it did help in certain cornering situations. It did help the bike feel a little bit lower to the ground. The lower center of gravity of the bike was maybe easier to lean over and turn in with, but it really felt like they had taken away more than 10mm from the travel. The bike seemed to wallow. They didn't feel well balanced under braking. They felt like they were constantly diving through the suspension and getting into a harsher point of it earlier, so there wasn't a lot of comfort. Even though this bike is mapped to be a little bit smoother, the suspension's a little plusher, it's kind of more of the everyday guy's bike, it didn't have the comfort that came with it on 22 models. Moving into 23, we're lower. I see the positives again in what they're talking about, the handling, and they did get it more comfortable. The suspension, definitely, I wasn't chasing as much comfort today as I was on the old bike, but I was still chasing that balance. I ended up going 2 clicks faster on rebound on fork and shock. Continue riding, I would probably do more. A little bit stiffer front and rear, and the whole idea of this was to bring the ride height of the bike up and just get it to feel like a normal machine. So the more aggressive you rode it, the more you pumped into the corners and really put pressure into the bike. It didn't feel like it was just sinking down through the stroke. So it's a toss-up for me at this point. I'm still kind of out. The jury's out for me a little bit on the lowered setup. I do see some of the positives again with turn-in feel and like ease to lay the bike over in, but with the lack of balance, I feel like I'm giving up in too many other places to be completely stoked on it. Moving over to the engine, I have people ask me every year, probably more than any other motorcycle, should I buy a 350? And if you're already saying that, you're probably on the right track. There's a reason you're thinking like that. Hey, I only get to ride, 2 or 3 times a month. I get on the 450, I do a couple laps, I don't feel good. It's hard to ride. I mean, even I finally feel what it's like to be in that boat. For years of testing, I got to ride a ton during the week. Last couple years of my life, I haven't gone to as much jumping around gig-wise, and it's hard to jump on a 450 and feel good, honestly. 350 is that perfect middle point. It's like the world's fastest ever 250F, and with all the modifications they've made, they've really thinned it down. I actually just for a couple tests recently have rode some like 10 to 15 year old 450s, and this 350 really doesn't feel like it's that far off that power. So again, they've closed that gap, and modern day 450s are just hard to ride fast if you're just not on the bike all the time. And with the mapping changes they have on the bike this year, Husky really pushing to have 2 maps that feel different. The standard map is really pliable in the corners, very connected, very easy to roll on and actuate and hard pack ruts like we had on some sections of the track today. But you can easily bump it into map 2 and have a much more explosive, quick revving character to kind of get it to pick up fast. When you bury it into a sand corner, feather the clutch a little bit, and it comes to life. And again, moving into this 23 model, the biggest difference for me is just kind of added mid-range. It's not a huge difference from the outgoing 350 for me on power, most of that being, like I said, kind of in the mid-range. But again, just in the last generation 350 came a long ways in itself. As with all the other new generation Austrian bikes, this bike has quick shift. It does have traction control. I do appreciate the traction control when it's totally blown out in hard pack. Not sold on the quick shifter. Fun on starts, but the little bit I've been riding some of their bikes the last couple months with it, I do find myself in certain situations bumping the shifter with it on and having the bike hesitate every once in a while. Nothing that's ever put me in a position of danger, but enough that I'm not sold on running it all the time. I tend to shift a lot in the air or in situations where I don't have the bike under load, where when I kind of do the math, I'm like, there's only 1 or 2 times a lap where this thing's actually helping me. So again, it's cool they brought it to market. For me, a little bit right now, I would label as a gimmick. It's getting there. I'm sure as they continue to develop it, it will eventually have more of a purpose and use. But for right now, it's cool, but it's not something I'm jumping up and down about. Touching on the new generation chassis a little bit, we do know because of how the teams had performed in Supercross, there were some question marks on what it is. The more I rode this bike, or this generation of bike, I really appreciate this chassis outdoors. I could see why, like, your Dungeon commenting more positively on it in these conditions is it is a little bit of a softer character than the outgoing bike. It feels a little more pliable, a little bit more comfortable, but it doesn't have as much immediate front end bite. The way the weight balance on the bike has changed, it just doesn't feel as planted up front as the old bike, which for my riding style, more neutral to rear steer, is totally fine. The front pushes a little bit, I'm good with it, but it does, in the most tightest of situations, not feel like it cuts down quite as quick, or just doesn't feel as planted on the front end in really extreme situations. So there could be a little bit of a drawback there, depending again on your riding style. So in closing, again, people ask, 350, is it for me? Does it have enough power? I would really argue that the majority of people watching this video are actually going to maximize a 450 more than they can maximize this 350. And the power output on them really has come a long ways. We rode the Fox Raceway track today, left over from the National. They did re-prep it, of course, but a lot of the same sections, about 70 to 75%. And one that popped in my mind is the finish line section has this pretty beefy triple in the middle of it. Nothing too crazy to do, but watching even the factory level 250s on race day, they're having to land off the double before and full seat bounce this thing, like full set into it over and over, even on really good level 250s. 350 the first lap, I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to come up short. Full send, got past the transition by like another 5 feet. The bike is fast. You could say this is, if anybody's ever wanted to experience a factory level 250, you could just go buy a 350. It'd be a lot less expensive and the maintenance would be a lot less. Again, if you're contemplating it, you're probably already on the right track. You should consider trying one of these bikes. See if you got a buddy that's got one, a dealer demo day, because I would say there's a very high chance that you would not be disappointed once you finally got to ride a 350.